Howdy ho!
How you doing?
Hey, I'm doing well. How are you?
Good.
Well, hello everyone out there, and welcome to The Harvest, episode 22. 22. You remember?
You
remember the
Love Connection?
Love Connection. Yeah, we'll be back in 2 and 2.
Forget?
We're at episode 22 of The Harvest, where we discuss everything cinema and story, and as we learn, you learn. As we grow, you grow. My name is Xavier Garcia.
I'm Jonathan Garcia.
All right, so we're going to change things up a little bit today and slightly stray away from some of the more technical discussions we've been having the last couple of weeks. We've been really digging deep into like technical story writing techniques, documentary writing, and whatnot. Yeah. We're going to change things up. We're going to talk about art in general. We're going to get into how art impacts everything from people to culture. Because I don't know if you remember, but at the very end of last week's episode 21, so check it out in case you haven't already, we touched a bit about this topic. We talked about the importance of creating films, story, and art that helps spread and preserve information to educate and entertain the masses. This week, we are expanding upon that idea. At one point or another, we've all been impacted by art.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
Likewise, art and or an artist have been integral to some of the greatest moments in world history, both for good and for evil.
Yeah.
Art both bridges and divides us at a cultural seam as it informs, shapes, and influences the very core of what makes us human. Ultimately, all of this is why art matters so much. Mm-hmm. Art matters, man.
Absolutely. I mean, art is a dangerous weapon.
Yeah.
It could be, it's very powerful.
It
so
is.
Those who are very talented with it have a big responsibility.
That's right. Yeah, it's like you're like a superhero.
Yeah.
With great art comes great responsibility.
Yeah, oh yeah.
You know, it's actually funny because we slightly dug into this even as we were talking to James Lindsay in our on our music composer episode. He talked a little bit about kind of like the career that he chose, and I think we were joking with him, you know, just kind of joking about, oh, you know, your parents didn't want you to be a surgeon or a lawyer, or you know, and he's like, and we talked about him choosing music and how there's that cliche of the starving artist came from like, you know, the musicians with their garage band, you know, playing punk rock, you know,
right.
And like striving for pennies, you know, like playing for free until their name gets out there and they eventually can, you know, charge to play at some event that no one's ever going to hear. And that's kind of like the plight of the starving artist. But the way that you put it is that with great art comes great responsibility. And I think you're very right about that.
Yeah. I mean, if you look even in today's culture, all the, you know, areas of art, and, you know, how some of them are so abstract and how some of them are so, you know, impactful, and you look at them and you feel, why do I feel this way? You know, everything has meaning. Everything has you know, something to say, whether it's saying it in your face. And so it could be, you know, a message that could destroy or it could build.
Yeah. Wow. You know, culture and art, they have a symbiotic relationship. They heavily rely on each other. One is influencing the other at all times, whether it's culture influencing art or art influencing culture. To start off, let's kick off with some situations of culture encouraging the creation of art. Now, this can be seen going way back to cave drawings.
Oh, yeah. Right.
You know, the culture is a culture of pure survival. And so if you go into these caves and you see these drawings, what you are seeing are drawings of survival techniques. Hunting. You know, the way that you take down the beast is with a spear, and you need, you know, a tribe of 20 or 30 people, and you see these paintings of these great, you know, moments of this cultural past, and they would paint in order to communicate and pass on it one to another the meaning of what it, you know, what it is to be of that tribe, what it is to survive, how it is to move forward.
Sort of like ownership or like property, or, you know, protection, food, things like that. I know that not too long ago there were some discoverings of rock markings in Saudi Arabia, and there were feet markings all over, and it was almost as if they were marching. It was actually in the book, in the Bible, talks about how God told the Jews when they travel to mark your footsteps. And it's kind of controversial right now because, now it opens up the opportunity of saying, who does this land really belong to?
Oh, yeah.
So, markings already there, building attention.
Oh, absolutely.
Just finding a piece of archaeology, is now creating, a message. What is it saying now?
No, I'm glad you went there because, let's take some of those biblical cultures, for example, as an example for a minute here, because, you know that at different times, like, for example, Moses would erect some sort of a commemoration, and then would come up with, like, a name of God, like, God as my provider, and he would erect like a stone, of the earth. He would make an altar of earth and would say, Jehovah Jireh, and he would say, God my provider here, and that would then talk about his relationship to his faith and his and religion. And I'm glad you went there because another example of culture encouraging the creation of art, well, we have the biblical writings from which we get a lot of our parabolic teachings from the relationship and the culture of Old Testament times. For example, in the book of Deuteronomy, there's the Shema where, Moses encourages everyone through his writings to constantly be clinging to God. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. And in that, he's expressing how the importance of these biblical writings, these stories, because that's what they are. That's what the Tanakh are. They're stories of God's relationship with man. It's the art that God created when He created man, right? And if you let's say, like, despite where you're at in your religious or faith beliefs, the Bible is one of the most beautiful artistic writings. Poetic, the Proverbs, the Psalms, there's music, there's poem, there's poetry, there's love stories. And when you read the Shema, it's Moses encouraging the Israelites to constantly teach each other these stories, to read them to one another, wherever it is that they go. By the way, when they go to bed, when they wake up, teach it to your children, and renew their minds constantly in order for them to be identified as Israelites, as Jews, and that's important. It's their culture. They're like, this is your culture. It must be ingrained in your children. They will grow up as godly men and women if this is embedded into them, and that is culture encouraging the creation of art.
Yeah, and art, what it does, it's able to penetrate your subconscious, your conscious, to be able to reevaluate your previous understanding of things. So what I mean by is, you have the scripture saying constantly, remember these things, remember what's been done, remember creation, remember how it all happened, remember how I provided for you, how I got you out of here. And a simple art can affect, it could affect every sense of the body. For instance, in Adam and Eve, you have the beauty of this fruit, that was pleasing to the eye and desirable to eat, and that's a lot of times what art can do. It penetrates the importance of reality versus the new message that comes in. It divides what you should be doing versus, wow, wait a minute, let me see what this is saying. It's almost luring, and that's the power of art.
Yeah.
It can lure you to see something differently, or to be, manipulated, possibly.
Even that.
And change your mind from something that you shouldn't be doing versus, what you should do. So that art can do that. Art divides.
It does. Absolutely, 100%. And it's interesting because I think, art isn't necessarily just like what is seen. It isn't just the cave drawings. It's also what is heard, right?
Right.
In storytelling,
feeling.
Exactly. And then the relationship that occurs between the person receiving the input and the input itself is where the art is happening, right? Because sometimes, like nowadays you've got like Jackson Pollock, right? He throws a whole bunch of painting up at a canvas, and for someone, they're gonna see that as a mess. They're gonna be like, that means nothing to me. That's a mess. It's just a whole bunch, like my toddler can do that, right?
Right.
But then someone else will look upon that, and something will happen inside of them where they have now a relationship with what they're seeing, and they're being moved, informed, transformed one way or another, and changed. And that's when there's art. There's the moment where there's just kind of a subtle, like, blindness to it, and there's nothing really happening on the inside. And then when it does, now it's taking shape. And remember, we were earlier having that discussion about, Marvel and Scorsese and, and how he calls these Marvel movies theme parks, versus art. I think the one thing that we were dancing around, but that we never actually got to the point of, is the fact that something, when it's art, something happens inside the beholder.
Right.
Something changes inside the beholder. Besides just, oh, that was fun. Now, now I'm not going to think about it. It's just kind of dead fun. I'm not going to consider it at all. It was a moment of catharsis. It was great. I got away from like the stress of my life, and I got to kind of be entertained and just forget. Versus, I watched this, I considered this, something happened inside of me, and I now have to like look into myself as a result of what I have seen, and that's when it's art.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. A lot of people find, for instance, a lot of people agree with Scorsese. They'll say, oh, yeah, that's theme parks. But, you put that next to Star Wars, and a lot of people think that's art and innovation. And so it's like, what's the difference?
What are you talking
they're both epic. They both have the same feel and style. Yeah. Like, what is art, you know? And that, in their sense, is it a personal thing? Or is it, a society, a cultural, everyone kind of agreeing to it at once? So it's really open-ended.
It's a deep topic.
Yeah.
It's a deep topic. I don't know that we have the time for that today. I think it would be a really good one to sink into. But yeah, no, I mean, look, I think it's a mixture of both. I think there's the individual component, because you can be moved uniquely and individually and differently from another person. Like, look, you could be watching Endgame, right? And you watch Captain America pick up Thor's hammer, and all of a sudden, like, you're impacted by that, and you're changed, and you're transformed, and you now start to recognize and think about righteousness. Because remember, that was the whole thing about the hammer. Like, only one whom is deemed worthy could pick up that hammer. And the role of Captain America was a role of a righteous man. He never swore. He was always by the book, and he was the only one that was able to kind of slightly move it at one point, during the Age of Ultron. And so you're like, it must be righteousness. It must be that kind of, that allowed him to pick it up. And so now you might want to think about yourself and be like, oh, is it righteousness that moves someone, and that can then become your art? It really could. Mm-hmm. I don't know. What do you got?
No, I think it's like you said, it's a deep topic. I think that art really is it could be very personal, but at the same time it's universal. It can go on, and like you said, for someone it looks beautiful, for someone it's pile of garbage.
Right.
So it's
this is some hot garbage.
Yeah, it is. And but I think it's very important to understand how art is used and where art can take you.
Yeah.
And what it can do for you, and what to be careful of.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm glad you went there again. Because some of the earliest forms of story were oral, like we said, Moses. Prior to Moses, all of that which Moses wrote was a bunch of oral traditions that were handed down, and it was orally handed down. And then Moses received that, supernaturally, divinely driven and guided by God, himself and whatnot. But there was that oral tradition, and that has happened a lot in our own history. Now, like for us as writers, one of the greatest stories, the story of Beowulf.
Oh yeah.
That was one that was passed down orally through oral tradition, and it was created originally because of the values within Anglo-Saxon culture, and it was passed down generation to generation because it demonstrated the important aspects of their culture and their values. You know, you've got the epic hero. You've got the story of this epic hero, who that's what Beowulf was. This epic, you know, vanquisher of evil, this warrior, and it was very much connected to their warrior-based culture, that Anglo-Saxon culture. Beowulf had the characteristics that this culture deemed were important and necessary for survival, and that's why the story of Beowulf was passed down, because it was informing them what it meant to be, you know, this warring person, this tribe, these people. And then you notice that, as you know, because like some of these, that tribe was very pagan. And then when Christianity was brought in by the Norman conquest, then you can see a lot of the Christian themes being infiltrated and influenced into the Beowulf story. But the like once the Normans and other provinces from the Kingdom of France invaded England, their Christian values infiltrated the culture, and the process then therefore infiltrated the art. And so now you've got Christianity infiltrating into like the story and into the art and into the ways that people then therefore relate and connect with one another, and it created for, you know, for culture, and you know, and even the today we study the stories of Beowulf. We study these stories in order to go back into time and to go back into history in order for us to gain an understanding of what the past was like, what these moments in the past was like. I mean, art is a lens through which we can study past cultures. Mm-hmm. Because you can see what was important to the people at the time, what was necessary for their survival, mm-hmm. what they deemed and considered their passions, but not just their passions, their, you know, what was necessary in order for procreation, day to day, and life.
Yeah, you know, what's interesting about that, I remember hearing a story during the 6-Day War. There was these. Oh, I'm not. Now I'm blanking out if it was the 6-Day War. But anyways, the Torah scrolls were being destroyed, mm-hmm. And there was a specific man, not Jewish, that respected the scriptures, and ended up tucking them in the tires to get them out of the land before they were destroyed. And when I thought about that story, to get it out and drive them out of the land before they were destroyed, these are big things. These are big scrolls. And I think about that, and I think, you know, just like you said, art, if it's not seen as art, then it's not seen valuable, and you think, you know, anything could be destroyed. You know what I mean? What's not valuable is destroyed. But when someone sees value in something like an art piece, whether they believe in it, whether they accept it, it still carries importance. Well, and it's able to, you know, for this particular story,
absolutely. You know, because like Hitler did the exact opposite, right? Hitler was destroying art, in order to destroy the culture.
Exactly.
In order to destroy culture.
Exactly. And to your point, to destroy them, the stories and everything that has ever existed, to completely remove the remembrance of a people.
Right.
And that's the power again of art. Right. Whether if it survives or if it dies, you can kill the memory of something if it dies, if it's destroyed.
That was precisely Hitler's plot and plan. Mm-hmm. That's what he sought after to do, was in order to erase the inferior races, he erased them by erasing and destroying their culture. Mm-hmm. Their art, that which defines, you know, whether it's the Jew or the black, you know, European, or the minority, whoever, you know, like his whole list of those that did not measure up to his ideal standard of what is perfection. He went after the destruction of all, you know, of those cultures, and did so by collecting. Now, it's interesting because a lot of these things have been emerging. He didn't destroy everything.
Right.
Because again, I think you're right. Like when something is art, you see it and you're just like, it's almost like it's like you can't destroy it.
Right.
It's like, because a lot of the stuff you just kind of collected and hid away and stored away.
Right.
And
Because
didn't
again,
necessarily burn.
it divides your previous perception from your new understanding.
Yeah.
It's like this, whoa, what am I looking at that kind of goes beyond what I know into something that just made me have some sort of revelation.
Yeah.
And like, again, it can stop you from anything that you were going to do, or it can cause you to do something that you weren't going to do.
Right. Going back to the Bibles, for example, like in certain communist countries, like when they were trying to destroy the spirit of the Christian, the way to do so was to burn the Bibles, to burn the Word, because by so doing, there's no longer that connection to what defines their culture and their identity and who they are. And so it's interesting that art has such a symbiotic connection to culture. It's literally like they live side by side and they influence each other. Can you think of any like modern day examples of like some of art and culture here in the U.S. specifically, like of in the U.S. some sort of how art influences the culture?
Absolutely. I know that there's quite a bit. I know one personally that I tried to will keep my kids away from is certain music. Music is a very strong influencer. It's art and the elements that come out, the ritualistic elements that come out.
Yeah,
are strong.
The hip hop, the hip hop movement. The culture of the hip hop life has influenced the hip hop genre of music.
Right. It affected the way people do everything.
Yeah.
Talk, dress.
Yep.
Behave, communicate, languages changed. Everything is affected when art has successfully been able to accomplish its beauty, and it's, again, that's why I believe a lot of, even as we continue going back to scripture, that's why a lot of times God was like, don't
Separate
go
yourself.
there.
Yes. Separate
Don't
yourself
look
from
that
other culture.
Take
Separate
that down.
yourself, yeah.
Destroy this thing, because you will change and you will become everything that is an abomination
to me.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and we see it. We see. Look, this is a prime example for me anyway. Disney.
Yeah.
Right. Now, it isn't so much that our culture has influenced the creation of what Disney is doing, because a lot of what Disney has put out, or at least traditionally what Disney put out, going back to the Cinderellas and the Snow Whites and all of that stuff came from Germany. Mm-hmm. That's all the stuff that the Grimm's brothers collected back, in Germany, and and here you've got two lawyers performing a psychological experiment, and they're collecting these stories from the diaspora of the German culture in their German, in these native tongues, with their own native influences all over Germany, and they're collecting these stories, these fairy tales, and all of this stuff is influenced, or rather is being put together in order to describe what the soul of Germany is. What is the soul of the German person, of the German, the Voltgeist. That's what actually is the Voltgeist, the spirit of a German. Mm-hmm. And this was all collected. And all of these stories were put into, kind of a manual, an anthology of a collection. And you've got the Grimm's Brothers stories. And this stuff is the stuff that we're seeing, slightly tweaked to make it child friendly here in the United States. But the story of Cinderella, if you read the Grimm's Brothers version, here she tries on all of the sisters, the stepsisters, they try on the slippers, right? And they're trying on the slippers and it doesn't fit, and they can become frustrated. And the prince is like, well, it doesn't fit on you. Come here, give me that. Let's try the next one, right? No, not you. Come here. And then Cinderella's there, and then it's her slipper. In the Grimm's Brothers version, these women were so desperate for their financial advancement, for position and status, that they disregarded themselves physically. They actually cut off their toes. And in the Grimm's Brothers version, it's a bloody mess. They're just so that they can they're mutilating their feet so that they can squeeze into these slippers, right? And that is connected to the Voltgeist, to the spirit of what it means to be a German. And these stories have these influences that we're receiving today. And come on, like, this stuff is it is influencing the American culture. We grew up on Disney. We grew up on these stories that are essentially originally the Voltgeist, the spirit of Germans, the spirit of the German collection, been kind of washed a little bit and filtered in through, Disney's reimagining of them, and then put out as animation for children.
Yeah.
And in order to change the culture of America, and it's doing that. That's why, for example, going back to Moses was so adamant about the scriptures being taught first to the children. That in order for the defining of what it means to be a child of God, the scripture must be taught to the child. Mm-hmm. And it says, what does it say? Raise up a child in the ways of the Lord, and when they are older, they shall not depart from it. Right. It's all over the scriptures. If you can influence the youth, you can control the future of that of the country, of the space and place.
It's a simple plan. And we would be dishonest with ourselves if we aren't aware of the artistic plans of these studios or these pieces of art, or wherever you call them, in anything, in music or in poem and poetry and lyrics and whatever it is. If we're not aware of their intent, then we will fall into and agree with their message.
Yeah. And it influences us. Mm-hmm. It influences our identity and our culture. Mm-hmm. I just have a quote from Wilhelm Grimm, one of the Grimm's brothers, and as he was going through the process of collecting these stories, he writes, quote, "I strove to penetrate into the wild forests of our ancestors, listening to their whole language and watching their pure customs." And that's what he collected as he went back to the annals of Germanic history in order to collect what it means to be a German, and created these stories that we today grew up on. It's interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Now, art can also be attributed to some cultural movements, whether it was propaganda or political or religious. This is, kind of the stuff that we've touched upon so far. So here's an example of culture shaping art. So now we talked about how art can shape culture. Now here's culture shaping art. One of the most popular and historical artistic movements obviously was the Renaissance. Mm-hmm. And you've studied a lot of art history, so you, I'm sure, had to go into the Renaissance and what art pre-Renaissance and post-Renaissance art is like, and I'm sure those were the dark ages of your art history past and your design. You
definitely want to get into
degree.
Graphic designing and all that stuff, but the history is important. Yeah.
So you've got the Renaissance happening from between the 14th to the 17th centuries, beginning in Italy. Mm-hmm. And eventually it gained traction and spanned across the rest of Europe by the 16th century. And a lot of these things were, obviously the Renaissance occurred because of a myriad of reasons. There's no one specific reason that anybody can say the Renaissance post the Dark Middle Ages occurred because of X, Y, and Z. There's no real X, Y, and Z. There's a myriad of reasons, but some of them are obviously the increased interaction between different cultures. As roads increased and people were moving about and expanding and shifting and growing about, as cultures were moving and changing, new thoughts and new ideas were being born. outside of the Dark Ages, if you will. The rediscovery of ancient Greek and Roman texts. And so as Greek and Roman texts were being brought up, people were awakening to, this is how the humanists and the Epicureans and like these thinkers, how they once thought. And that kind of started a curiosity, and then the movement spread that curiosity. Another thing is, the emergence of humanism, different artistic and technological innovations, the impact of conflict and death. After having gone through like the bubonic plague and people having to grapple with life and with death, a new thought and idea of what happens before and after. And so now you've got this renaissance, if you will, this renewal of thinking that has come about, and it affected art big time. It changed art. Huge, right?
Yeah.
This is where you're going to be the expert here to talk a little bit about the art. It affected architecture. It wasn't just like the paintings.
Right.
It affected architecture, Renaissance architecture. It affected, music, philosophy, politics, religion, science, poetry, mathematics. It affected everything.
Yeah. Yeah, it what's amazing is that it created this form of this rich collection that is still used today.
Yeah.
That time, if you think about it, the structures, the architecture, it was such an impact that even today we use elements of it in politics and in our money, in all areas of that particular time, that you have to think how it did that still affect so much that it even affects today. It's just amazing. You said it all. How it affected every area,
and not necessarily for the better. Look, I don't know. I wasn't living in that time, and I don't know what it was to go from the Dark Ages to the Renaissance. I'm sure the entire world thought it was, this is amazing, a new way of thinking.
But that's
because
the point.
Of the oppressive
it was Dark Ages,
right?
Closed off. The church controlled everything.
Right.
Everything was taken away from them.
Right.
Where all of a sudden this massive boom of art and ideas and structure and philosophies, and that it almost was some sort of like fresh of air just coming in, of this freedom to express oneself. And that's why it all just culminated. It all just came together with this massive talent of creativity.
And it can be good and it can be bad.
Yeah.
It can be good and it can be bad, because out of like when someone is so like controlled, and finally, they get out and they go wild.
Yeah.
They go wild, right?
Yeah. If they're not,
and I think that the society, I think society went wild. Look, we saw that even in the sexual revolution of the 70s, right? Like the world went wild as a result of the control that was upon those generations from the 50s and the 60s. All of a sudden, buck wild, and we're seeing that even in the faith-based film movement. And this is a very sensitive subject, a very sensitive title, but for so long, the gatekeepers of faith-based film were like, this is the only way, no, you can't show this, you can't show that, you can't do this, you can't do that, it has to be this, it has to be that. And now that tools have been made available to everyone, they've gone wild. And so it's like, you as an artist have to find where the truth within your own realm, your own movement, your own voice, and how to speak that voice truthfully, and not, versus one extreme or the other. I don't know. It's just that in and of itself is an interesting, kind of subject matter to go through, because we're living it. We're seeing it right now. We ourselves we're very much involved with working with the faith-based film movement. Whether or not we define ourselves as that is superfluous and besides the point, but we do work in that world and in that realm. And what we're like, as we're looking in and we're seeing, it's like, whoa, you see the extremes on both ends of the spectrum. on both ends of the spectrum.
Well, that's the thing, is that art has no boundaries.
Yeah.
And people want to explore the furthest ends of it. And because of that, they enter into, irrational, immoral, areas of life where it could, affect the psyche of an individual. A lot of this stuff, you see people that are making such beautiful things, and you look up their history, and they were psychos.
Right.
And you have
sociopaths.
You have to understand that that's really the danger of art.
Right.
That you can call anything art these days.
Right.
There was a story about a guy who plastered a banana with
he duct taped the banana to the wall. That was in Miami.
Yeah, people were looking at that thing for days, like, oh, this is amazing.
This is art.
Then the guy pulls the banana out
and he eats it.
And it was just like, then
it went from art to performance art.
Yeah, exactly. People were like, how could you? And he was just basically,
making a
comment.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's I personally feel, for me, that I have a certain boundary with my art.
Yeah.
Because
you recognize that with great art comes a great responsibility.
Exactly. You got it. That's it.
Yeah.
That's it.
I feel like Uncle Ben.
It keeps repeating in my mind.
So now I actually want to give like a quick example, because in our notes, the viewers can't see this because we're talking about it, and especially on the podcast, you can't see this because we're talking about it. But we have a really cool example of pre-Renaissance and post-Renaissance art, and there's two really famous, very famous paintings of the Last Supper. The first one is by Ugolino de Siena, and it's from 1325, and then there's The Last Supper by Leonardo da Vinci from the 1490s. Now, if you look this up, The Last Supper's version by Ugolino de Siena is they're sitting around in a circle,
mm-hmm.
and they've got these supernatural halos over their heads.
Yep.
The proportions of the people aren't correct. Mm-hmm. It isn't really realistic, and it's not trying to be. It's trying to express something that's more holy and supernatural. Mm-hmm. It's trying to show something that is deeper than just the art. But then, as a result of the Renaissance, you've got Da Vinci wanting to paint something that is more true to the natural, correct proportions, mm-hmm. Real human expressions, and conversations and different types of interactions.
Human beings,
the human
saints.
life, a moment in the human life. Mm-hmm. Kind of like the Mona Lisa, right? The Mona Lisa was a woman that didn't exist, but yet everyone feels like she did exist because she's so proportional, mm-hmm. so excellent, like she's this, this, I guess, supposedly beautiful woman at the time. I don't know.
That's the debate.
Right. And it was, but it was based on, the realness. And so the difference between these two paintings is you've got, the realness of this moment of these men potentially engaged in unique and different conversations. And then up top, there's all of the heads are turned. They're all focused on Jesus, and they've all got their halo saints on it. It's very interesting to seeing the difference in the
almost
art.
Supernatural versus natural.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's and again, it comes with the culture and the time. The people were thinking that these, they kept being painted as, people that were above them, without error, without issue, without problems and sins. But, Leonardo da Vinci wanted to express them as you and I. These are people with questions,
these
confused.
Humans,
what happened? Why is he leaving us?
And that's the humanism element sneaking into the culture, even sneaking into the paintings, like having these questions, these thoughts, these ideas. Well, what's going to happen?
Yeah.
Are you going to be taken from us? Is that the moral thing? Is that the right thing? And then Peter going, morally thinking in his brain, should I let him die? Should I not let him die? No, you can't wash my feet. That's what Leonardo da Vinci is trying to get at, where you see Ugolini is more so focused on the divinity.
Yeah.
And on the spiritual aspect. It's interesting, isn't it?
It is. It is. It's those two perspectives. Again, they're both art, and they're both expressing that artist's feeling towards that time. And for some people will love the fact that, that they're saints and they blessed us, and, while others will be like, they're sinners just like me, and they had questions just like me, and, they didn't know what Jesus was saying until, they had that revelation by the Holy Spirit. So, there's not one better than the other, but, it's for a particular group of people.
It's interesting, and I don't know if this is going to make any sense, but here you see going from the Dark Ages to the Renaissance, right? And so you see it going from this supernatural, spiritual, depiction of the Savior to a more natural depiction of men just having a conversation, right? Mm-hmm. I feel like we're going backwards right now. I don't know. Okay, the movies that you and I grew up with in the 80s and the 90s. Mm-hmm. In the 80s and the 90s, the heroes that were going to save the world were the Arnold Schwarzeneggers, the Sylvester Stallones with guns firing. I mean, I can still play the movie Commando in my mind. Him rescuing his daughter. And kicking the guy and the tube going through his chest.
It's epic.
It's epic, and it's and lots of guns, lots of muscles. Dylan, lots of flexing, very humanistic, very natural. But now, what is the trend and the shift? The Savior is now like a god. The Savior is now almost spiritual. You've got Thor. You've got the X-Men. Mm-hmm. You've got these supernatural creatures, these supernatural beings, these godlike beings. And we as a consumer are almost crying out for more of this content. It's almost like we're crying out for a Savior. And at the time we thought that our Savior in the 80s was going to come as a result of big guns, big muscles, and big bravado. And now, it's more so more supernatural powers, more, kind of spiritual. I mean, Professor Xavier, the ability to control his mind.
Elsa and all
right?
That.
Even
it's
in Disney.
You have the powers, and people are and all the kids are oh, yeah.
Well, because remember, the old Disney was Prince Charming. The muscular Prince Charming was going to come and save the day and kiss the princess or rescue her. But now it's, exactly Elsa with her frosty fingers,
I hope we're saying the right things, the right people. But
I get your point. But you get what I keep saying, saying Elsa. It's how dare you confuse my
movie,
my
we
characters.
Are having a hard time.
But you get what the point ultimately is that there's almost a reversal in going from the Dark Ages, right, to the Renaissance, and now today going from the Schwarzenegger, Stallones, Chuck Norris's, to the, Thors.
Well, you know what? I agree with you 100%, and I think where it's gonna go is where it just becomes so abstract, where at some point you'll be like, "What am I watching?" But I like it,
right?
And I think music is there already.
Yeah. Music has always been ahead, because it's existed longer. But
music is Music has always been ahead with kind of the trend of knowing. First, you have these songs with such powerful stories, and you're like, wow, and you never thought it this way. And then they slowly build to words where you can't even say them. It's just mumbling, and you're just like, wow, those mumbles sounded cool. I mean, like, what?
Those mumbles hit me here.
Yeah, exactly. But people are starting, and movies are going to go there. Movies are going to be so... what's the story about? You find out, you watch something, you're like, what did I just watch?
Yeah.
And you don't know what it was saying to you. It was just a lot of, killing and probably nudity and just to stimulate all your senses, but not give you some sort of, nothing to take away.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. I mean, look, I'm seeing it today, Marvel movies are all the rage, right? Mm-hmm. And they're all the rage for a reason. Mm-hmm. I think that this is going back to that symbiotic relationship between art and culture. I think the culture is crying for this kind of art to escape into, to be rescued. I think I do. Look, I'm going to be honest with you. I think I do. I think that there's a cultural crying out for a saving and a savior, and that's why we flock to these movies and give them all of our money and all of our attention because we want to be removed from the craziness of the times that we're living in.
And the reality of their circumstances or their lifestyles or their, yeah, absolutely.
Wow. Now, a couple of examples, and we're kind of getting to the end. I think we probably aren't going to be able to talk deeper into this because this topic is long. And there's a lot that we can talk about. Maybe we split it up into, we've been doing this, we split it up into multi-part sections. And so let's not get into a new topic just yet. And let's talk just briefly about this whole Marvel thing that since we're there now, that we were discussing, regarding Marvel movies as theme parks.
Yeah.
And we'll only briefly, and we'll close with this, and then we'll go into our creator's tip of the week. But is there anything at all? Yeah.
So we know the reason this came up was because Scorsese, was a big thing during the I think it was Oscars.
Prior to the Oscars, he had been saying these controversial things about the Marvel movies.
And he mentioned how he thinks that all these movies, these billion-dollar movies, they're basically theme parks. You know, that's not. And I'm paraphrasing. There's not real art or real filmmaking. Xavier and I were thinking, in a sense, I understand what he's saying. But, when you think of comic books, when you think of storyboards and content like that, that is, is that art? Because a lot of the source of these movies are coming from comic books. Yeah. Is art not a collector's item? It is. Yeah. And so I know, I get what he's saying. Right. I understand what he's saying, that what he makes is completely different than what they're making. Well, but I start to, for instance, one of the things that I can see him talking about is the richness of dialogue. When you see a lot of the superhero movies, the dialogue is weak. It's just, unless you're improvising, unless you are, phenomenal acting, you're improvising, you're bringing, because these dialogues, these conversations, they kind of they're supposed to
they're
just
more
get you
specifically to get you to the next scene and the next moment, the next beat.
Right. Whereas you're watching a Scorsese movie and the conversations and the dialogues
it's revealing
are
character,
powerful.
It's revealing motives.
They could probably say nothing for like 10 minutes and he could be tapping on a table and exactly what he's thinking.
Yeah, right.
And so I see what he means by art and the richness, where you end up just getting a revelation of an expression or of a word or of a long conversation of dialogue, whereas exactly what you're getting and you're being told it, whether it's by exposition, and there's not much work to be done.
Yeah.
So
it goes back to what we were saying. What happens in the individual? What happens inside the individual when they watch this movie? Like, are you just sitting there kind of with like your brain shut off? I just kind of want to shut off my brain from everything and just watch something to go numb and just enjoy it.
Right.
Versus like I'm watching this and I'm working through it. Like every Christopher Nolan movie, you can't. Look, he's a genius, so he's found a way to be able to get both types of people: the people that want to shut off and just watch it for the spectacle, and those that they need to work to follow along. Like Inception, you have to work in order to follow along. Inception, Interstellar, even Dunkirk. I mean, like as you're watching the differences in time, you're working and you're gaining insight because you're like actively involved in the story. You're actively involved in the process. Even with The Irishman, if we're going to talk about Scorsese, as violent as that is, because all Scorsese films are. However, the stories and how he's infusing history and the characters, like it's making you work. You're involved and you're trying to solve like what's going to happen next, and you're solving it and you're involved. You're a part of the storytelling process. In those moments, something's happening personally within you. It's similar to like the person that sits in front of a painting.
Yep, exactly.
And they look at a painting and something's happening in front of them, or the person listening to a song. And it's a well composed song or score, an orchestral exposition, and you're being moved. But like, go back to the person looking at a painting. When you're sitting there and you're looking at a painting, and all of a sudden you start to weep. I've seen that at museums, and I don't know that I've ever been drawn to a moment of weeping. Although the closest that I did come to was when I saw the statue of David. When I saw the statue of David when I was in Florence, I wept, and I cried. I got emotional because it connected with who I am, in my faith, and it was weird. I can't even explain it. It wasn't because the statue was so magnificent, because it isn't. It's small. You read about it in your in books and in art history books, and you think it's going to be this massive sculpture, and it isn't. But when I saw it, something inside me changed. Something shifted. I can't explain it to you, but I gained this visual of something that had always been 2D on a piece of paper, but then at the same exact time, it also connected with that faith component and all that I know to be King David, and then the artwork that depicts him, and then I was just at that moment, I wept. Something happened. There was a connection between myself and the art, and that led me to think about myself. It led me to think about me. Life choices, literally life choices. I mean, a little bit about my story, and when I was living abroad, it literally got me to think about personal life choices when I'm looking at a piece of art. And that's what art does for the individual, and it does it also for the collective group. That's why, in a theater, there's a collective intelligence. You're moving the audience when there's the collective. There's an intelligence there. There's something that was just deposited into the culture of that room, where the whole room just went, or, you know what I mean? And art does that. And that's why, for me personally, when it comes to Scorsese's comments, I'm a little bit more fluid with them. I don't know that I necessarily, I get what he's saying and I understand it completely. But I also, when I look at what the Russo brothers were able to accomplish with Endgame, the art in that is, besides the hours that were spent by animators and the drawings and the fact that those guys have an entire history of education, and they've gone to school for this, they've labored for this, it's the tip of the iceberg, right? All you see is their design of Thanos, but what you don't see is the iceberg that's up beneath it of time, passion, desire, love, all of that stuff. I don't know. I put all of that together, and I can see how this film is still it's bridges, it's still art. I don't know. I get it, but I don't get it.
I think you said it great. I think for Scorsese is he expects when people watch his movies, they're standing in front of a painting.
Yeah,
he doesn't expect everyone to agree with the art.
Right.
He's going to expect some people to hate it, be upset, love it, be confused. He expects people to have different emotions, and that's the truth. I remember talking to some Christians about Silence, and I thought that was a brilliant movie. Whereas for someone, it's I didn't like it, and it really wasn't that. I'm that for me, it was that is especially the Japanese guy. That is the struggle of a person who is trying to digest this revelation of the word and just can't because of the persecution. You know what I mean? That's what's going to happen in the future. If you think about it, the persecution of the church and being, battling. Do I receive the mark? Do I not? Do I go all the way through? It's not really your gospel until you grasp for it and no one can take it away. Yeah. You know what I mean? And I thought it was a brilliant movie.
And that's exactly what Scorsese was going for.
Right.
That's literally what he was going for when he created I agree with you. I thought Silence was a masterpiece, personally, because I felt it. I could feel the pain of the characters, and the struggles that they were going through. I don't expect
someone to stand there at the end of the movie and open the Bible and now preach the gospel to them.
That wasn't the goal
genre.
of it.
That's right. You know what I mean?
Right. That's something else.
That's something else. And so it for me it was honest.
Yeah. I like that.
And sometimes, some people think, well, art is all feeling.
Right,
It's like, yeah, well, sometimes art says a truth
Yeah.
about something that may not be easy for you to digest. For instance, Banksy does that a lot of times. He does a lot of his art that is like right in your face, and he's got this little kid holding machine guns. It's like he's calling out realities, exactly, for you to reconsider. Be like, hey, this is who we are as people, or this is who they are as people, and what do you think about that? This is what we're dealing with, and so it's not just. It will affect your feelings, absolutely, but it also can give you an understanding of a circumstance. It could be a history of something that's going on, information. So again, I understand Scorsese. It is that masterpiece. It is that content you look and you think. Whereas you said it again, some of the other movies that some people don't think is art. Because you just shut off and don't think.
Right, like Fast and the Furious. It's like I'm just gonna shut off my brain and
just watch explosions, racing, and then
a whole bunch of Vin Diesel
reggaeton going off.
Family.
Yeah, exactly. But then you can step back and you say, okay, let's chop the movie up a little bit. Let's just push story away. Let's look at elements like the graphics, the CGI that was put into all this stuff, like you were saying, Let's break down that stuff. You know how much work was taken into the simulation and the explosions and all the textures and so there is more to art than just a storyline. There's more to art than just, in a movie there's so much art from different departments, the clothing, the way that how you piece, the costume together is art in itself. It says so much about
art
the character.
is about not just what the viewer receives, but also what the artist is putting in.
Yeah,
right. It's got to be.
Yeah,
that's why it's symbiotic. That's why it works from both perspectives. Because you brought up the costume designer; they're pouring their heart and soul into this, like. The choosing of the costumes, the fabrics, the textures, the colors, the way, the layers and how they look according to like the space and the place and stripes versus dots versus blah, 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 blah. Like to them, that's their art. And I know that all of that went into, as much as it went into the Marvel movies, as they go into Taxi Driver, or whatever Scorsese, like Raging Bull or, whatever. It's the same. And so it's both about what's being put in and what's being taken out. I think so.
Yeah.
Anyway, awesome topic. We're going to continue on this because there's a lot more, and we kind of left off on examples of art shaping our culture and the use of art, specifically the use of storytelling. So we're going to go into a little bit more about storytelling. We're going to talk a little bit about Nazi Germany and about, the manipulation of storytelling for propaganda and what that led to. Art being used for evil, and we'll use other examples of art being used for good, like, for example, the orations of Martin Luther King and how he used art, the storytelling tactics that Jesus himself used, the parabolic tactics, in order to move an entire country away from racism and civil rights and that civil rights movement. So anyway, we're going to get into that a little bit next week. But for now, our creator's tip of the week. I'll go first since I dropped the ball last week.
Yeah.
And I didn't have a tip of the week. I have one now, and it's a good one. And it's called Helios Pro. Helios Pro. Helios. Helios Pro. It's a light tracking app designed specifically for cinematographers, photographers, and designers. It tracks light. And not only can you pinpoint the position of the sun, the moon, and the stars, but it also helps you apply augmented reality and light simulation in order for you to visualize what your shot is going to look like. So, for example, let's say you're going to make a movie, a dinosaur movie. Well, you can take your phone, right, with Helios Pro, and you're going to be in the woods. You turn on your camera, through Helios Pro, you can see the woods, and you can add a dinosaur moving, like augmented reality, and you can see how the light is going to affect that space. Awesome. It's a pretty cool app. It's also a very expensive app because it's got a lot of technology. It's a $30 app.
Okay.
But look, you get what you pay for, right?
Right.
So check it out. Helios
Pro.
Helios Pro. It's pretty cool.
Like it.
Yeah.
In the past, I've mentioned this company before. We use this company for, I know that I did it for one of the scripts. I wanted to see the software. The company is Hollywood Camera Work, and they have Shot Designer, which we use sometimes for.
We use that a lot
for our,
when we're plotting our top downs.
I've also used Casuality for writing the script.
They did that? That belongs to them?
That belongs to them. Yeah.
No kidding.
Yeah.
That's how you found it.
That's how I found it, right. Right. And so another thing that they released not too long ago, I believe it's been around for a little bit, but I kind of just started, I noticed it, was Screener, and what it does, it helps you kind of see the banding for your green screen. And even helps you see the banding for overexposure as well. It's better for green screening because a lot of issues for when you are creating art in the background and you're trying to form some graphics and VFX and 2D elements, you want to make sure that you're able to have a clean green screen.
Yeah, because then you can't.
Exactly, because the moment, obviously,
wrinkles,
people who
dark
know
spots,
this, you deal with that issue of different levels of green, and it just...
Then forget it. You're no longer green screening, you're rotoscoping.
Right, exactly. And so, it's a great tool. And another tip on
What's
top of Green Screener.
Green Screener.
Green Screener. And another tip on top of that, a little bonus tip on top of that one.
You had to.
I know, I had to.
You had to.
A good tool to use along with Green Screener to help you completely clear out the green screen is Composite Brush, which I've used a lot.
Yeah, Composite Brush.
In our VFX. It's not just taking out the green, but it's actually using a different algorithm to clear out the green or the blues, or even compositing different colors, kind of like DaVinci Resolve does when it's able to replace colors and stuff like that. So it's a very powerful plugin that you can put on After Effects. I believe that's all it's for. And so Green Screener.
It's on the new After Effects. You can't. For those of you that don't have CC, I don't think it's compatible.
Yeah, no CC.
Yeah,
so
you need CC.
I think it's it's not. I think the last one is CS6, so it's not compatible for that. But everything up from that, which I believe is CC, it works. So those two work very well hand in hand. Before you record, you make sure that your banding and your green screen is smooth and perfect green, and then you take it back, put some Composite Brush on that, and you're good to go.
Silky smooth.
Yeah, you have key light and different plugins that come with the software, but I recommend Composite Brush.
Sweet.
Yeah.
You bonused it up, man. That was good.
Yeah.
you that was good. I like those, especially because we're probably going to be using that a lot coming up on this next project.
Yes. Soon.
Yeah, the 1850s, man. That's a lot of composite brushing in order to do some fun set extensions.
Yep.
Anyway, well, thank you guys all for joining The Harvest, episode 22. Special thanks to our producer, Chelsea Cowie. In order to support The Harvest, you can visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/The Harvest Podcast. For any questions, you can reach me directly on Twitter at xgarcia.
And I'm at Jonathan Harvest.
And for any longer questions, you can reach us info@mountharvest.com. I strongly encourage you guys to get involved with some questions because we'd love to discuss them on the air and kind of get your insight about certain things, whether it's about story, even if, prior to this next week's topic, there are any thoughts, comments, concerns, ideas that you may have, write them in. info@mountharvest.com. We'd love to hear from you.
Yes, and don't forget to press the subscribe button and like and share.
Just a simple press.
Just press it.
Press it.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, guys. Bye.
Join us at thepatreon.com/The Harvest Podcast for some BTS footage of our cinema production life.